Good morning, my name is Lorene. Welcome to Books at the Bottom of the Stairs. The doors are open on both sides of the house, so you may hear gardening or trucks go by. Anyhow, it means that spring is here, the world is opening up, and we all have a little bit more of a bright outlook on life today. So what I'm here to talk about is A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. This is a paperback edition, and it is a Harper Perennial modern classic. It was first published in 1943, and Betty Smith wrote it somewhat autobiographically, and upon her deal with the publishers at the time, which I think was also HarperCollins, let me just check. Harper and Brothers, as they were known back in 1943, she had to put in some fictionalized aspects. They found that it was just a little too realistic, I think, for the readership at that time. The story takes place in the years just prior to and just during World War I, and it's taking place in Brooklyn, as the title suggests. In the 1918s to 1921-ish, sort of, and we get a sense of pre-war, post-war, and the war itself doesn't really come into the story terribly much, and so it is a very inward-looking book in both location and the characters. The book opens with a really lovely quote. "There's a tree that grows in Brooklyn. Some people call it the tree of heaven. No matter where its seed falls, it makes a tree which struggles to reach the sky. It grows in boarded up lots and out of neglected rubbish heaps. It grows up and out of cellar gratings. It is the only tree that grows out of cement. It grows lushly, survives without sun, water, and seemingly without earth. It would be considered beautiful, except that there are too many of it." And I think that's just a lovely metaphor for the entire book. It's such a beautiful, beautiful love story to the area of Brooklyn that this takes place, community called Westminster at the time. I don't know my geography of New York at all, so I'm imagining that's now a small neighborhood amongst the immensity of New York. It is the darn hardest part of New York as far as I can tell. There might be harder spots to live, but I'm not sure, just a question of degree more than anything. Francie is a young girl at the time the story opens, and she loves books. She reads a book a day, and on the weekends she likes to go out on the fire escape in the summer and take her time over a fictional book. She's set herself the goal of reading through the entire alphabet from A to Z, and she has a local librarian who doesn't see books the way you and I would see books. They're just there on the shelves to be taken off, handed to blah blah for her, whereas Francie just loves reading. She loves the act of reading. She loves the act of finding a book. She loves everything about the book, the paper, the smell. So I'm sure we can all appreciate Francie's devotion to the printed page. She's an undiscerning reader at this point. She's mostly ambitious about trying to educate herself and to know as much of the world, and her curiosity drives her. So she's not, I would be more of a go in, pick something else, maybe check the bibliography, random. I'd be more of a cherry picker, I guess. But she's very determined. So she gets books that have no interest to her, but she sticks it through. And she gets books that she adores. This is how we first meet Francie. And the story's device does a little bit of backward looking and a little bit of present day. So there isn't a very clear plot line to this book. It's not as if Francie is looking to gather the money to get to college, and that's the entire storyline. It is certainly part of her goal is to get to the end of high school for sure, and hopefully college. But it's not the only thing that we encounter in terms of plot lines. The parents each have their backstories. There's stories as individuals and there's stories as a married couple. Her brother Neely does not play that significant a role, which I was a bit sad about. It would maybe be one of my two main criticisms of the book, is that I would have liked to know Neely more. Neely comes along quite quickly in the birth cycle after Francie, and the mother doesn't love Francie. Francie's one of those kids that just kind of pretty ugly when she comes out, as opposed to her brother, who's just, you know, a shining, lovely little baby. And the mom's devotion is focused on Neely, and she never wants Francie to know, but you know how kids are, they figure it out. But the family's patriarch, Johnny Nolan, is a nice man. He's a deeply flawed man. He struggles to understand how to meet the responsibilities that he knows are there as both a father and a husband and a wage earner. He wants to do it. He's aware of his responsibility, and he's a complete and utter failure at it. And so he begins to drink. His drinking gets worse as the years go by. His ability to be support of any kind, emotionally, physically, financially, just diminishes. But everybody loves Johnny because he's got a sweet, sweet singing voice. He'll sing at the drop of a hat. He's a cheerful drunk. And there's really, aside from his drinking, there's not really any deep flaws in Johnny's character. So if you have a lack of appreciation for getting beyond someone's drunkenness, you're not going to like Johnny. It is hard. It is hard to look at someone's conscious decision to drink themselves out of being responsible. But you still do it with Johnny. Johnny just keeps coming back as a sensitive, caring, loving parent. He understands both of his children. He finds ways to be kind to them in their deep poverty. And I have to admire him, really, and I'm very surprised by that. I don't have a lot of sympathy for an alcoholic character. Well, there are extended family members and extended community members, and each one of those have got some kind of a journey that they're on, and we get to meet them all. There are two aunts, Aunt Sissy and Aunt Evie. Aunt Sissy goes through a number of husbands, legally and illegally, and she calls them all John. And she is determined to have children, but she's faced with multiple miscarriages. But she is still a very vibrant, loving, engaged character. And Evie has, does she have children? I don't think she has children. I don't remember, no. But she has a husband who is just, I think he's hilarious. He's a dairy, he's a milkman. He's delivering the milk using the old wagon and horse, and the horse hates him and he hates the horse, and the whole storyline between Aunt Evie and Wilmot and the horse and the dairy, and it's just another storyline that I found quite humorous. Then, of course, there's the storyline of the worsening poverty of the family Nolan, and just the struggles that they have to go through in order to eat, or how they get through a day without eating. It's just a tremendous, tremendous exploration of these characters in this poverty in the 1918s, before really soup lines are being instigated. There's just your family to support you, and that's about it. If you don't have some kind of family or community, you're in a pickle. And there are also some characters in the story who don't have family to support them. So sometimes the community is supportive and sometimes there isn't. There's an awful lot of cruelty in this world, both by adults and children. There's really very little empathy. Everybody's having a really hard time, so why should you be more empathetic for someone else who's hungry when you're just as hungry? There's that sort of lack of compassion for each other, or compassion for oneself. And that, I think, is part of what made the authors originally just not really terrifically enthusiastic about this book. It took a lot for this book to be published, and when it was finally received, some people just adored it and other people really, really hated it because it tells the truth. It's very, there's no filter or film or rosy glasses or lenses at all between what Francie, the main protagonist, is seeing and what's actually happening. She's not a delusional child. She's not missing out that adults are arguing, and she's not missing out that there's no food on the table. So Francie has goals to be a writer. This is one of the reasons why this book is so interesting, is that in her childish attempts to learn to write, she encounters different English teachers who have quite different expectations on what is good writing. And there's the majority of English teachers who want the writing to be sweet and pretty and fantastical and uplifting and hopeful. And then there's one or two teachers who support Francie when she occasionally writes what's right in front of her. So there's this tertiary plot line going on about what it is like to want to be a writer, and how do you approach that, and how do you get recognition for that? How do you understand your own voice? And she never gets past the age of 16 in this book. So we're seeing sort of an age range of about 8 to 16. And at a certain point, in order for her to go to work, she has to forge papers to join the workforce. So she's 16 for 3 years in a row. So when her 16th birthday comes along, finally, she's kind of over it. She's already had to be pretty mature by the time she's legally mature. So that's the storyline. The characters are really, really terrific. They're so well drawn. They're very engaging. You have this, almost each one of them, there's this love that you have for the character, and then there's this equal repulsion for their faults. Their faults are very much part of the story. One of the things that surprised me about this book an awful lot was I thought that Anne of Green Gables was the book that had influenced me as a young person. I remember reading that when I had to have been before grade 6, because I remember getting in trouble looking out the school window because that's what Anne of Green Gables did, so therefore that's what I would do. And yeah, there's another story that I imitated from Anne of Green Gables that got me in well, a lot of trouble. It involved a pencil, a boy, stabbing, and the principal. So yeah, I thought it was a pretty influential book. I read this again when I was, for the first time, when I was 14. I think I mentioned that in an earlier blog. And it was a sweet story. I liked it. It was hot. I wasn't really, I wasn't really picking up much beyond the superficial of this book. I read it again when I was in my early 30s. And had children around, so it was very much a pick up and drop kind of book. So it didn't really resonate quite the way it had for me when I was a teenager, and so kind of dismissed it. Now reading it I'm 60 now, and I realized there is so much in this book that influenced me. I had no idea. And one of the big things for me was when they described Francie getting herself ready to read a book on the fire escape, where she gets herself a particular cushion and a particular kind of candy and a particular kind of drink, and setting herself all up, and it's a certain time of day so that the sun does just exactly the right thing as far as not getting too hot or too cold. She makes this ritual out of reading, and I thought, wow, I never noticed that I did that, but I have been doing that for a long time. So whether I was inspired by Francie or not, I don't know. Too long ago to say. But certainly that piece of making a ritual before you sit down to read is definitely something I have in common with Francie. And there are other things as I went along. I mean, my father was pretty much Johnny Nolan without the good nature. And how this family manages to stay in good relationship with this person who's deeply alcoholic was something that confused me quite a lot as a young person. How can you keep liking someone like that when there's such a devastation that the family keeps, crashing against? So how can you be in good relationship with that person was always a question I had in my head, and in order to survive well, I decided you don't be in a relationship with those kind of people. So Francie and her mother and brother are in opposition to that choice. So it's very interesting to see that. There's the determination to get to college. Francie doesn't really know where to go to college, how to get there, what she's going to do when she gets there. That would be me. I determined that I was going to get to university come hell or high water, but why, I don't know. And I think that there was a connection there in terms of the determination. It's education is going to get you out of the pit, and I wanted out of the pit. So it's now, well, like 30 years since my second reading that I realized how influential this book had been on me as a young person. And that was startling, because there are other books that we read, we go back to our childhood favorites and read them and think, oh, that, you know, it wasn't quite the same, didn't have quite the same resonance. So as I was reading A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, I just kept getting shivers, sort of like, wow, that sounds so familiar. That feels so familiar. I've heard that before, I've seen that before, but not in the kind of, I've read this before, but I've experienced this before. And I think also I do a fair amount of volunteering these days, the last 10 years, with homeless people at a shelter. And I think that comes into play too. Like people, you have to look beyond people. You have to look beyond the dirt. You've got to look beyond the poverty to see the human there, to find the story, to engage and have a relationship. And that's what happens in this book. I mean, nobody is really judging each other for their poverty. They're judging each other for who they are and how they behave. So I just really had no idea how influential this book had been on me. So it's quite a treat. I really enjoyed it. It's certainly a modern classic. I am going to go back to Harper Perennial Modern Classics and see what else they recommend, because I'm not having a great time with the classics. So maybe there's a few more out there that I will enjoy just as much. I hope that your reading dreams and adventures continue to come true, and I'll see you again. Take care. Bye-bye.